Yeah, we back. Welcome back to part 9 of an amazing series, man. We are reading the biography of King Henri Christophe, man. Shout out to the author of the book, Paul Clammer. We are reading the book entitled A Black Crown by Paul Clammer. Now, start from part 1 so everything makes sense, right? In part 1, we discuss the origins. Where did he come from? In part 2, we discuss where was he in the first days of the revolution. In part 3, we discuss the rise to power. Part 4, we discuss the French invasion of 1802. Part 5, we discuss the various battles of the revolution leading up to the victorious climax. Part 6, we discuss the first 2 years of the Haitian state after the revolution, the construction of the citadel, one of the greatest architectural achievements the black man ever produced. We also discuss the Dessalines administration and the Dessalines assassination, the precursor to the nation being split into 2 states. Part 7, we discuss the 1807 Haitian Civil War between Christophe's northern faction and the southern mulatto faction after the death of Dessalines. We also discuss the beginning stages of Christophe's navy, from purchasing his first warship in 1807 and then building up a fleet of more than 7 warships which he purchased straight cash, no loans. Part 8, we discuss the coronation ceremony of 1811, one of the most legendary events that took place in the world during that year. We also discuss the consolidation of Christophe's power as the supreme leader of the North. Now in part 9, I'm assuming we're going to be talking about the rebuilding of Christophe's territory, right? After the many years of war, after the revolution, after the Civil War, now it's time to rebuild the nation. It's time to rebuild the state. It's time to really get into the art of nation building. It's time to establish commerce. It's time to establish trade. It's time to build the nation. Now that we've overcome many years of adversity and warfare, now it's time to put all our energy and resources into the art of nation building, right? We don't got to spend so much money on the military and national defense. Now let's get into it, man. Let's jump into part 9. Let's get back into the book. Where Alexander Pétion had been forced to liberalize land ownership in the Republic, Christophe's code of laws formalized the plantation system that he had helped Louverture and Dessalines to maintain. Landowners and farmers were to be bound together in a web of reciprocal obligation, and if those who ran the plantations were to be like fathers, then farmers were given the right to have their complaints answered, and there were instructions on the duty of care for the sick and the elderly workers. Corporal punishment was to be banned. Farmers were granted the same share of the plantation income, with special shares reserved for certain skilled laborers such as sugar refiners. Despite this, agricultural workers remained tied to the land. Work began at sunrise with an hour's rest for breakfast at 8 o'clock and a further 2 hours of rest at noon. In the afternoon, work continued until sunset. On the day of rest, attendance of Sunday prayers was encouraged. Landowners were obliged to send workers for public projects such as the maintenance of the highways to be carried out at the end of the harvest season. To improve food security, landowners were required to plant new stands of breadfruit and mango trees every single year. Thus regulated, the population would work in concert to bring in prosperity, stability, and good morals to the kingdom. The Dessalinian idea of freedom through national self-sufficiency still held sway over the Republican concept of individual liberty. The publication of Christophe's Code of Laws was the crowning moment of the first year of Haiti's new monarchy. Its publication meant that Christophe could see in 1812 in a bullish mood. The newly regulated sugar and coffee industries had just paid for a new crown to be made for him in London, set with diamonds, emeralds, and rubies. Other luxury goods soon followed, including a Herschel telescope, gold cups and silvers, a diamond collar, and several tiaras for the queen and princesses, as well as a sundry diamond and gold pins, brooches, earrings, crosses, and watches. The contents of the order were printed in the English press after it was briefly confiscated by customs agents for evasion of duty. The shipping agent had sought to avoid paying export duties by labeling the consignment as upholstery. Any embarrassment felt at the palace may have been tempered by the description given in the Gentleman's Magazine of the Sword of State, which said that its 8-foot length gives a grand idea of the muscular power of the emperor. The new kingdom's confidence stood in marked contrast to that of its southern neighbor. 2 weeks after Christophe's coronation, and fearing that an invasion was imminent, the Port-au-Prince Senate announced that the national treasury was so bare they could no longer guarantee to feed or pay their army. Oh my God. Man, meanwhile, Christophe in the North prospering, everything lovely in the North. Them boys down South struggling. The treasury got no money. The army not even getting paid. Let's continue. The silver gold coin was devalued by punching a hole through its center, and the city's merchant class was called upon for the emergency loan to the government. A further crisis rocked the Republic. That August, when General Delva, who had served at Mocenigola with Lamar and was known to be sympathetic to Rigaud, was in prison for conspiring against Alexander Pétion. Christophe took advantage of the disarray by issuing a new proclamation to the residents of the south and the west parts of the kingdom. In it, he declared that, having been raised to the throne by the love of the people, he now sought again to reunify the scattered fragments of the great Haitian family and to bring back peace to the bosom of the nation, too long torn apart. An amnesty was offered to all those who would acknowledge him as king. Noble titles were dangled before Pétion's officers as reward for joining him in Haiti's new era. The talk was of unity, but to most listeners, the offer to forgive his former enemies and cast their faults into oblivion felt more like a demand for supplication than a genuine attempt to find peace. The royal words fell on deaf ears. André Rigaud died unexpectedly on the 18th of September in the town of Lecay at the age of 50 years old, leading Alexander Pétion to hope that this would lead to the swift reunification of the southern peninsula. Rigaud's successor, General Maximilien Bourgella, offered to reconcile with Pétion, but negotiations between the commissioners representing the two parties collapsed in an air of mistrust, in no small part due to Pétion having recently encouraged troops in Jérémie to rebel against the breakaway state. Christophe's forgiving mood similarly failed to last, and he encouraged further unrest in the south by shipping more arms to Gaume. In January 1812, rumors began to swirl in the Republic that another attack on Port-au-Prince was imminent. A voodoo priest called Basquet from Croix des Bouquets, north of the city, was discovered masquerading as a veiled apparition of the Virgin Mary in a fig tree. This false virgin attracted many followers who were terror-struck when he announced that a powerful army would soon appear on the plains and to resist it would be to disobey God. When the tree was set ablaze by the Bishop of Port-au-Prince as a demonstration of faith, Basquet was captured and unmasked as an agent saboteur for Christophe. Despite this, the story only grew in the febrile atmosphere of Port-au-Prince. When 3 northern ships appeared on the horizon a few days later, Pétion announced that the tyrant Christophe was preparing to march south to increase the numbers of his slaves. The army was mustered and orders sent to Jacmel for reinforcements. The ships were Christophe's corvettes, the Princess Royal, the Améthyste, and the Athénaïre, named for Christophe's 2 daughters, and the smaller brig was named the Jason. The capture of Mocenigola and the creation of the southern state had allowed Christophe's navy to become the master of Haiti's waters. At the end of January, he sent the ships to patrol Haiti's southern coastline to test their strength and run supplies to Gaume. Admiral Goodall was in England, so in his absence, the flotilla was commanded by Vice Admiral Pierre Saint-Jean. News of the consternation that the ships had caused was reported back to Christophe through a Royal Navy ship. Christophe had made a point of offering a magnanimous hand of peace, but by sending this show of strength to encourage Republican defections, he fatally exposed the limits of loyalty in his own forces instead. Unknown to Christophe or his vice admiral, the quartermaster of the Améthyste, Eutrope Bellarmine, was a Republican who had found much sympathy for the cause among his crew, most of whom had been pressed into service. When the ship had passed Port-au-Prince and became separated from its sister vessels, the Améthyste crew mutinied. 2 officers joined them and the remainder were locked in the brig. Bellarmine immediately turned the ship into the nearest port at Miagouane to declare himself for Alexander Pétion, unaware that it was under the control of Bourgella. Hiding his surprise, Bellarmine declared himself for the south, and the Améthyste was duly renamed the Happy Reunion. The ship took on fresh southern troops and quickly embarked under the captaincy of a locally resident Frenchman named Augustin Gaspard to find the Athénaïre and the Jason in order to persuade them to abandon Christophe also. The task was remarkably easy. After a short parley, the crews of the 2 vessels quickly threw in their lot with Bourgella, and the officers who remained loyal to the kingdom were taken prisoner. It was the most disastrous day on the seas for Christophe since the seizure of the Lord Mulgrave. Before the ships could return to Miagouane, a Royal Navy ship appeared on the horizon to complicate matters. Captain Yo of the frigate the Southampton demanded to know whose flag the Happy Reunion was flying, and was surprised to learn that there was now a 3rd Haitian state claiming its right to a navy. Now, time out. At this point in time, as you already know in the last episode, André Rigaud, when he came back to the country a short while after, he declared his own 3rd independent state, right, from his hometown of Lecay. Now, André Rigaud died in the year 1812 or somewhere around there, so he was succeeded by another one of his protégés, General Bourgella, right? So now, currently on the island, there's 3 rulers. You have Christophe in the north, you got Pétion by Port-au-Prince, and then you got General Bourgella deep in the south by the town of Lecay, right? So now, Christophe has sent his ships down south to patrol the southern Haitian waters. And within the crew of those ships, there were soldiers who were formerly the soldiers of Alexander Pétion who had defected onto Christophe's side, but now they defected back to the Southern Republic. So now they've raised the flag for Bourgella's Republic in the south. So now the British Royal Navy ship had passed by, and they were like, wait, what the hell? There's a third Haitian state. There's Christophe in the north, there's Pichon in the south, now there's somebody else? Like, what's going on? So that's where we at right now. So now one of the crews of Christophe's navy had mutinied, and now they decided to wave the flag of the south. Now let's continue. Aware of the complications created by the seizure of the Lord Mulgrave, Captain Yo advised that, I know of only two contending chiefs of Haiti, General Christophe and Pichon, and that only his admiral could rule on Borgella's legitimacy, adding that it is very far from my wish to use any violence, and I hope that you will proceed to Jamaica for examination quietly. At the same time, it is my fixed resolve that you shall go. The French captain declined the invitation. With 300 soldiers on board and 2 more Haitian ships at his back, he believed he had the upper hand. After Yo ordered a warning shot to be fired, the Happy Reunion replied with a broadside and moved alongside the Southampton to try to board it. The other Haitian captains felt differently, and after a brief exchange of fire, they fled to leave the 2 frigates to pummel it out. The 38 cannons of the Southampton were brutally superior, so Gaspar learned when his main and mizzen masts were reduced to splinters above his head. When a further volley looked set to sink his ship completely, he raised the white flag. Yo allowed the wounded to be landed at Miragouan, but before setting course for Jamaica, he called in at Port-au-Prince to disembark the remainder of the Haitian crew, accidentally muddying the waters when it came to claims over ownership of the vessel. The mutiny and subsequent intervention of the Royal Navy caused great consternation in Cap Henri, in Port-au-Prince, and in Les Cayes altogether. Christophe ordered his Secretary of State, Julien Prévost, to write immediately to Admiral Sterling in Jamaica. Whereas Christophe never failed to address Pichon's republic in anything less than superior tones, with the British he was more diplomatic. Christophe's secretary said, given the law of nations and the accepted customs of civilized powers, and particularly that of the English nation, whose integrity is well known, Christophe's government requested the return of his ships along with the guilty authors of the crime. It had taken nearly 2 weeks for a reliable account of what had happened to be confirmed in Cap Henri. But Captain Yo's brief call at Port-au-Prince had meant that Pichon was able to send his letter to lobby Sterling before Prévost. The mutineers had been bound for his republic, he claimed, and only adverse winds had seen them land in Miragouan. Thus, the British were duty-bound to return the ship to Port-au-Prince. Borgella, who had no previous dealings with the Royal Navy, sent a letter signed by the half-dozen British merchants based in Les Cayes, who he had taken the precaution of putting under house arrest. Sterling's response was more confident than that of his predecessor over the Lord Mulgrave, and in his report to the Admiralty, he praised Captain Yo for his actions in capturing the ship under fire. He dispatched a sloop to Les Cayes under the command of a captain who was well known in the town, and was quickly able to free the British merchants by revealing the bluff with which Borgella had tried to hide the weakness of his hand. London had still never sent instructions on treating Haiti as an independent state, but he was determined to be even-handed to both Christophe and Pichon, and declined to return the ship to either of them. He then wrote to Christophe and said, I agree most fully with you in reprobating every species of treason. But as your ship, after arrival at Miragouan, had the name changed to the Happy Reunion and was officered and manned by General Borgella and fought most desperately, I do not think myself authorized to give her up to any power, and therefore I shall send a ship of war immediately to England with a copy of the letter containing your claim, as also the demand of General Borgella and General Pichon on the occasion, and I will write to you as soon as I get an answer. So now, check it out. Now, Alexander Pichon and General Borgella have both claimed rights to Christophe's ship, right? Christophe sent the ship to patrol the waters. One of the crews mutineered and declared themselves for Pichon in the south, and then Borgella decided that he wants to claim ownership of the ship as well. Pichon also decided to claim ownership of the ship as well. Christophe said, yo, bring my ship back. So now he said, listen, I'm not giving, the British captain said, I'm not giving the ship to any of y'all. I'm gonna write a letter to the King of England and we're gonna see what happens, and then, I'll holler at you later. Now, let's continue. Christophe's diplomacy had not only failed, but Sterling's letter disappointed him even further by addressing him simply as General Christophe. Christophe raged at both the loss of his ships and that his own sailors had dared to mutiny against him. He refused to see any fault in the strict discipline of his rule and could do little about the British position, so he blamed the loss of his ships on Pichon and his suspected French paymasters. A nobleman called the Baron de Papalière was singled out as the lead conspirator in the loss of the ships. A native from the town of Les Cayes, who had taken part in the uprising there against the Saline in 1806, he had been captured at the Battle of Sibert in 1807 and thereafter pledged his loyalty to the northern regime. In his essay on the causes of the revolution and civil wars of Haiti, Vastly described how Papalière's charm and money allowed him to corrupt the sailors of the fleet, masking his designs beneath the cloak of generosity and patriotism. He was allegedly aided by 2 Frenchmen and a former secretary to the Retour in Port-au-Prince named Viard, who was denounced as a man of color in complexion but a white Frenchman in principle. One of the conspirators was none other than Christophe's old friend, Joseph Bunel in Philadelphia, who had apparently fallen from favor over a dispute concerning monies owed to a number of American merchants. The second Frenchman, named Montesquieu, who had been plied with favors by Christophe and allowed to trade directly with Jamaica, a route that it was now alleged allowed him to send letters indirectly to Port-au-Prince. Such then is the depravity of the human heart, wrote Vasty. Although he wrote his history to glorify Christophe's reputation, in a rare moment of candor, Vasty conceded that the conspiracy was far more extensive than he had first imagined. Vasty said, "Since these unfortunate events, we have learned that persons whose rank and official situations raised them above suspicion had taken but too active a share in the conspiracy. These figures were left unnamed, but Papalier was immediately imprisoned, and Montesquieu was only granted clemency after providing documents that proved the conspiracy had been a French plot to help drive the 2 halves of Haiti back into open conflict. Bunel never stepped foot in Haiti again." Damn, time out. So in 1812, the French conspired with some local agents on the ground to, I don't know what they were trying to do, capture one of Christophe's ships, reignite the civil war between the 2 states. I don't know what they were trying to do, but apparently the French were conspiring. They were involved in this plot when Christophe had one of his ships hijacked and the crew was taken prisoner. As you can see, the enemy's still working hard behind the scenes. Now let's continue. Vasty's account of the affair was not published until 1819. In it, he describes the state council debate that followed to discuss what reprisals, if any, should be taken against the Southern provocation. He carefully painted Christophe's reluctance to respond militarily against the more martial opinions of his counselors. Their force of argument won the day. Although a renewed conflict was repugnant to his heart, Christophe saw himself driven to it by an unavoidable fatality. As the meeting drew to a close, Christophe decided that only one avenue was left open to him: to march once more on Port-au-Prince. In his announcement in the capital on the 8th of March 1812 on the decision to strike against Pétion, Christophe likened himself to a lion roused from the slumber. No king could ignore the treachery of the miserable scoundrels who had delivered 3 of his ships to the enemy, he said. And if he had a fault as king, it was his paternal weakness in holding back his brave soldiers and giving his enemies time to muster. The time for such regal generosity was over. No, I would be guilty towards my people, towards my army and myself, if I delayed any longer and bringing those places still stained by rebellion under obedience. The people of the South had suffered for far too long under Pétion, but now their liberation is near. Your groans have sounded in my ears. The moment has arrived when I will complete your deliverance. At my appearance at the gate of Port-au-Prince, rally towards your brothers who march under the flag of the legitimate, strong, and benevolent authority that has the power and will to consolidate the happiness of all Haitians. You will find forgiveness, safety, protection, respect for your persons and your property. Lessons had been learned from the failure of the 1807 campaign. This was to be no swift infantry rush, but a slow and methodical approach supported by artillery. The army headed south in 2 columns, one of 9,000 men under the Duc de Plaisance, General Magny, which was sent to Mirebalais to approach Port-au-Prince from the east, and the second of 6,000 men led by the king taking the coast road from Saint-Marc. The remainder of Christophe's navy would provide logistical support. First contact was made on the 27th of March near Fort Sibert, just as it had been 5 years earlier against Republican forces commanded by General Jean-Pierre Boyer. As Christophe's army swept towards the capital, Pétion was more than 130 kilometers away in the far southwest. The rebellion in the town of Jérémie had finally proved a success, and troops across the southern peninsula had abandoned Bourgella en masse. After a very hard, bloody contest, which lasted 4 days, the links of Rigaud's party were dissolved, and Pétion's authority acknowledged in the south. The leader of the breakaway state had no choice but to bend the knee to Pétion, who had traveled to Les Cayes to take his pledge of loyalty in person. That pledge would soon be tested on the walls of Port-au-Prince. Boyer's forces were spread thinly along the defensive forts lining the Plain de Cul-de-Sac in front of the capital. There were just 1,300 men under his direct command, and they took almost the entire weight of Christophe's army as it bore down upon them. The Republican lines broke and only just managed to retreat to Port-au-Prince, but in the melee they were forced to abandon the garrison at Fort Sibert, leaving it far behind enemy lines. Careful not to leave himself open to counterattack from his rear, Christophe drew a complete halt to his advance to invest the fort. After several days of bombardment, Sibert fell, but the army had lost its momentum. The delay had given time for Pétion to rush up from the town of Lecaille with 6,000 soldiers to defend the city. They arrived to find 15,000 northern troops camped along the north and western walls of Port-au-Prince. Christophe's army spent a week digging itself from its position before unleashing the first artillery bombardment. For an entire month, the cannons roared, sometimes landing as many as 200 rounds a day. The damage they caused was extensive. Even the presidential palace was riddled with shells. As the weeks went by, the city seemed to falter. Money offices were forced to shut, which led to a shortage of coinage. Some of Pétion's soldiers were said to have taken up counterfeiting, safe in the knowledge that the sound of their coin stamps was drowned out by Christophe's cannons. As the siege dragged into May, it became clear that, however battered it became, Port-au-Prince was not likely to fall. Worse yet for Christophe, a naval encounter in the bay had ended with the loss of one ship and the capture of another. His supply lines were now vastly overextended, and his army began to run low on both food and ammunition. The defenders on the wall took to taunting his men by throwing bread and plantains at them and crowing that they were free citizens and not the slaves of a miserable king. A new attack was ordered to break the impasse. This time, a column of 3,000 men was to completely sweep around the eastern side of the city through the mountains that rose above it, descending near the town of Léogane. They would then cut the city off from the west to starve it of supplies while sending an advance guard to capture Lecaille, whose loyalty to the Republic was still assumed to be soft. The plan might have worked had it not been for the arrival of Bourgeois Southern troops, who proved their newfound dedication to Pétion by repulsing the force at Mont-l'Hôpital above Port-au-Prince. When the plan was foiled, Christophe left his forces in the field and retired to Saint-Marc to spend his time with the Queen and take counsel on the next moves. The fighting around Port-au-Prince had not gone unnoticed by foreign observers. Royal Navy ships offshore kept a cool eye on proceedings. In the middle of May, Admiral Sterling sent a formal offer to mediate between the both sides. Sterling saw that Christophe's forces were exhausted to the point where any retreat might even see his army annihilated should Pétion choose to lead a counterattack. This was quite unacceptable, as he reported to the Admiralty, because it appears to me essential for the interests of this island, Jamaica, that Saint Domingo should not be under one chief. Christophe rejected the offer of mediation out of hand anyway. Although he was facing defeat, the only terms his pride would allow him to accept remained Pétion's absolute submission. When the end of the siege came, it was through political maneuvering rather than the end of a musket. As the situation in the frontline camps worsened, soldiers began to slowly cross the lines from the Royalist to the Republican side. At first, this was a trickle, but on the 12th of June, while the king was still in Saint-Marc, General Magny, who had fought with Dessalines at Cotapiou and heroically recaptured Gonaïves from Pétion's army in 1807, marched 3 regiments of 2,000 men through the gates of Port-au-Prince under a white flag. Pétion was thrilled to receive such a high-value defector and duly maintained him in his rank. In his history of the Civil War, Vasty refused to accept that Magny had acted under his own volition and insisted that conspirators in his ranks had made him their unwilling prisoner as they sneaked across the battle lines. 2 days later, the captain of the HMS Brazen called at Saint-Marc to again offer British mediation, this time to conclude an armistice. Should you have any immediate communication to make to General Pétion, he wrote to Christophe, I beg leave to offer myself as the channel through which it may be made. The king, humiliated by the loss of one of his generals, sent no written reply. He instead ordered his army to strike the siege and retreat north in the best order possible. A campaign that had begun with the promise to plant the royal flag in Port-au-Prince and free his southern subjects had ended in failure and the bitterness of betrayal. Christophe began 1813 in a sour mood. His traditional Independence Day address showed that he was still shaken by the betrayals of the previous year. He urged all Haitians to look among themselves and denounce any potential traitors to the authorities. Christophe said, "What do they propose to do, those vile agents of the factious? To enslave you, to plunge you back into anarchy, to find in license and the upheaval of things a supposed improvement to their fate. But what was the result of their perfidies? Death as the just punishment for their crimes." Christophe's outrage underscored his frustration that both General Magny and the Amethyst mutineers remained safely beyond his reach. The one death the kingdom had suffered was that of the true loyalist André Vernet, the Prince of Gonaïves, who had passed away in the last week of December 1812 at the age of 70 years old. Vernet was buried with full honors in the royal chapel at Millau, and after the funeral, Christophe issued an elaborate set of new mourning instructions, ordering black silk dresses to be worn at court and for nobles, swords to be tied with black crepe. Now, time out. Rest in peace to André Vernet. That's a name that came up a lot during this book, the Minister of Finance. That was somebody who, during the death of Dessalines, he was the first one that was like, man, we got to avenge the honor of Dessalines. We got to march on the assassins of Dessalines immediately. He was always the one that was fired up, real loyal, real trusted officer of Christophe. Rest in peace to Andre Vernet, the Prince of Gonaive. Let's continue. In April, Christophe was troubled further when Pétion launched a daring raid into the heart of the kingdom. 50 men led by the head of his presidential guard, Caille Larivière, seized the town of Vallières near Gonaive. For Larivière, the mission was personal. He had grown up on a coffee plantation here, and his parents had been killed by Christophe's men. After a daring ride of nearly 100 kilometers, Larivière's men seized Vallières and beheaded the garrison commander. Much of the mission's success hinged on the help it received from the local cultivators, who had risen against Christophe and Dessalines in 1803 following the killing of Sanssouci and had adjusted poorly to the strict rules of Christophe's code of laws that now govern their lives. In the wake of the raid, the newspaper The Telegraph in Port-au-Prince crowed about the Republic's growing military confidence, and the speculation began to build that a larger expedition north would soon follow. It never did. Despite the defections from the north, Republican forces were still recovering from the siege of the capital and the failure of another campaign against Gauman's Maroons. The Senate had again been forced to devalue the currency and introduce new laws against money counterfeiters. Sanctioning raids like Larivière's remained the limit of Pétion's aspirations against the north. So essentially what they said there is that even though Alexander Pétion is still launching military campaigns against Christophe's territory, at the end of the day, his commerce, his economy, his nation is still suffering economically, right? So regardless of any military expeditions being launched into the north, at the end of the day, the economy of Pétion's Southern Republic was garbage. Let's continue. Christophe could be forgiven for looking inwards to his family for the stability he desired. In the month of May, his eldest daughter, Améthyste, entered her majority when she turned 15 and became constitutionally able to marry with the permission of her father. In the month of June, the national newspaper, the Royal Gazette of Haiti, gave considerable space to a grand celebration in the capital held for the Prince Royal, who made his first dedicated public appearance at the tender age of 9 years old, reviewing a military parade in his honor. The day was entirely given over to honoring him as the heir presumptive. Christophe did not attend. After a mass at the cathedral, the nobility lined up to pledge the prince their undying loyalty. In a speech written for him, he replied with humility and said, "The visit you are making to me today flatters me singularly, and it is with the greatest sensibility that I receive your tributes and congratulations." The Prince Royal vowed to dedicate himself to the service of the nation. He went on to say, "I dare to assure you, sirs, that my studies will not be without fruit, and that they will one day earn me your approval, as well as that of the good people of Haiti." Fewer than a half a dozen of Christophe's letters to his son are known to have survived, but the majority take a keen interest in his son's schooling. He commended his handwriting, but expressed disappointment on learning that his son had mistreated his servants. Christophe said, "That is not commendable. If you are anxious to merit my esteem and affection, that is not the way to go about it, but rather by means of a more proper conduct, submissiveness to the counsel and advice of those qualified to give them to you, and an affability and kindliness which will make all cherish you." His son's sometimes fractious spirit may have been a reaction against becoming the heir after the death of his brother Ferdinand, a brother he had never known or could ever compete with. Christophe's attitude towards his son's learning could be stern, but it was also countered by a tender nature rarely seen by his subjects. Christophe said, "I'm sending you, my dear son, a sample of some grapes from my garden at Mont Saint-Nicolas as a mark of affectionate remembrance," he wrote in August 1813. He went on to say, "I embrace you with all my heart and am your loving father." A report by an anonymous Royal Navy officer who spent time at the palace the following year also noted that the king was the most affectionate father of a family and that his children in his presence are under no fear or restraint. He has in his palace several little children, the orphans of old officers. They are always running around the room when he has no business and filling his pockets for bonbons. Such accounts are far from the scenes conjured up by Republican writers in Port-au-Prince, who imagined that the crying infant once so enraged his father that he grabbed him by the leg and tried to throw him from a window, only to be saved by a compassionate bystander. Now, time out. That section in the book, it really highlights the amount of slander and lies that was promoted by Christophe's enemies in the South, right? Because those who knew Christophe personally, they said that this was an affectionate father. This was somebody that was in his children's life, very attentive to his children, not only his own children, but he also had the children of some of his, his dead officers that passed away, the orphans of his old officers in his army. He would take on their children and bring them into the palace. They could live in the palace. They said the palace was full of children running all over the house, having a good time, well taken care of. But his enemies in the South, the Southern Republic, they were making up lies on Christophe, talking about he was throwing children out the window and things like that, and they really destroyed Christophe's legacy. They really did with the amount of lies they promoted, so many inaccurate lies on Christophe's name, mainly promoted and circulated by the Southern mulatto generals. And that's why I really have a hatred for the Southern Republic of Haiti. That regime led by, Jean-Pierre Boyer and Rigaud and Pichon. I hate those men. I hate those men because it's just, the list is too long to make, bro, I hate that regime. I hate that regime, bro. I wish Christophe would have marched during that time and killed every single one of them. I wish Christophe would have marched on Rigaud, killed Rigaud. I wish they would have killed Rigaud in 1799. I wish they would have killed Pichon in 1807. I wish they would have killed Borgella when he tried to hijack the ship. I wish all of them would have been killed. They all should have died. They all should have died for the salvation of the nation. That's how I personally feel. Fuck all of them generals down south. Let's continue. When there was no Southern mobilization after the Valliere raid, 1813 proved a much-needed year of consolidation for the kingdom. When Haiti marked the 10th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in 1814, Christophe's speech bore a remarkable different tone to the bitter rhetoric of the year before. 2 days of celebrations were held at the palace, where the king paid homage to the genius of the Haitian people who had broken the chains of French tyranny. Christophe said, "Like other nations, our first years were strewed with errors and troubles. Like them we have experienced the vicissitudes inseparable from revolutions. From this trouble, the stability of the kingdom had prevailed. There was order and tranquility in the provinces, a strong code of law and a national treasury free from debts. The manners of the people were more polished and bonds of marriage once more revered." Christophe said, "The nation is advancing by rapid strides to the highest degree of civilization. Strong in ourselves, we know no other enemies than those who come with hostile intentions and with arms in their hands." Christophe also addressed the contingent of foreign merchants who attended the party and toasted the royal family, reminding them of the warehouses that had grown with coffee and sugar. He said, "It is for you, gentlemen, by your foreign connections, to encourage your countrymen to undertake with Haiti lucrative commerce, which ensures to you great advantages. They will find here, like you, the same profits, the same security for their persons and their properties." After the party, the royal family embarked on a tour to the east. The editor of the national newspaper painted a picture of a nation at ease with itself by saying, "The diversions of the chase and fishing may be enjoyed in all seasons. The excellence of the roads, the beautiful habitations by which they are bordered, and the flourishing cultivation delight the eye and embellish the journey." The first stop was Bellevue-les-Rois, a renamed French mansion near Limonade, where they celebrated Epiphany by enjoying a performance of the opera. From here, they continued to Fort-Royal, where the streets were strewn with flowers and decorated with triumphal arches, and there were guests of honor at the wedding of the king's nephew, Prince Jean, to Andre Vernet's widow, Eleanor Chancy, an event celebrated with pomp and great rejoicing at court. After 2 days of hunting, the royal party continued to Wanamint, where they were entertained by visitors from across the border in Spanish Santo Domingo, who brought guitars and mandolins to play for the king. In the spring of 1813, the new governor of Santo Domingo, Don Carlos de Urrutia, had entered into a tentative correspondence with Christophe, assuring him of his desire for good neighborly relations, and the royal border visit in January 1814 may have been part of an attempt to enhance the diplomatic ties between the two men. After 3 weeks of hunting, pleasure boating, opera performances, and a visit to the Bay of Mancenille to enjoy its oysters, the royal family finally returned to the palace. A month later, the palace witnessed a parade of captured Republican soldiers by the Prince of Limbé, Paul Romain, after he had seized Fort Sabourin on the contested border. Hopes for improvement on the foreign as well as the domestic front also received a boost with news from France. At the end of 1813, reports had arrived of Napoleon Bonaparte's defeat at the Battle of Leipzig. This was now followed by the news that Paris had fallen and the emperor was sentenced to exile. Christophe praised the victory of the European coalition that had brought him down, but viewed Bonaparte's surrender with contempt. Christophe's secretary said, "His Majesty could never have divined that he would close his career in a manner so little worthy of a soldier." Bonaparte's fall offered new possibilities for relations with the newly restored regime of Louis XVIII. The first step was to declare Haiti's ports open for French trade. His Majesty has never confounded the French people with the government which oppressed them. describing the warm welcome that French ships would receive from the kingdom. They shall be protected and treated like the subjects of other friendly powers. You may give this assurance to the French merchants and even publish it in your journals. Christophe's newspaper reminded its readers that Haiti's blood sacrifice had contributed to Bonaparte's downfall and the liberation of Europe. It cautiously welcomed the new French regime, writing that Christophe would seize the opportunity to establish in a solid and lasting manner links of commerce and friendship which would be compatible with the honor, liberty, security, and the independence of the people of the kingdom. The open hand also came with a warning. The absurd and chimerical projects of France's colonial lobby were ridiculed, and any attempts to reconquer the country will be met with fire. Christophe said, "We shall give no quarter, take no prisoners, let them do the same to us. It is then that we shall prove to the whole universe what a warlike people is capable of, armed for the most just of causes, for the defense of our homes, our women, our children, our liberty, and our independence." The appointment of Pierre-Victor Malouet as France's new Minister of the Marine suggested that many in the new regime believed that regaining control of Haiti was neither absurd nor chimerical. Now, time out. Y'all remember back in like episode 2, episode 3, we discussed that name, Pierre-Victor Malouet. Y'all remember that? Y'all remember I told y'all about that name. Well, guess what? It's back again. Let's continue. It was Malouet who had encouraged Saint-Domingue's planters to defect to the British to preserve slavery back in 1793, and he had later written a book detailing the horrors that befell the colony's white population at the hands of the black revolutionaries. In a letter to Louis XVIII in June, he restated his support for returning Haiti to a state of slavery. See, y'all remember that name, Pierre-Victor Malouet, one of the most ardent enemies of the black man. Let's continue. In June, he restated his support for returning Haiti to a state of slavery, but underlined that the word itself must never be used publicly. The old planter class were steadfast in offering their support and lobbied the King of France with reminders of the wealth that once flowed from the colonies. They were aided in this by the Treaty of Paris that concluded the European wars. A secret clause between England and France effectively ceded London's policy on Haiti to Paris by promising not to obstruct any potential attempt to reclaim its colony. Furthermore, France was granted permission to revive the slave trade for 5 years. For the planters, any future French ships calling at Haiti should be carrying enslaved Africans rather than trading with the free black nation. In June 1814, Malouet dispatched a diplomatic mission that he hoped would pave the way for Haiti's submission to French rule and return the people back to chains. 3 agents were chosen: Mr. Laves, Mr. Franco de Medina, and a third person simply known as Draverman. Laves would travel to Port-au-Prince to meet Pétion. Medina would deal with Christophe, and Draverman was to treat with Bourgella in the now defunct breakaway southern state in an attempt to exploit old divisions. The negotiators were given secret instructions that made France's intentions clear. No matter what they told the Haitians, the King of France has resolved to deploy his powers to return the insurgents of Saint-Domingue to their obligations only after having exhausted all measures that his clemency commands. A client black elite of those who had been free before 1793 will be maintained in the restored colony, but the majority of the population will be returned to slavery. Furthermore, Malouet also erroneously instructed the mission that the king had already ordered a military expedition should the diplomatic efforts fail. Mr. Lavesse's first letter to Pétion, sent from Jamaica, disowned slavery as the policy of the usurper Bonaparte. It alluded to a general wish of extending the former rights of French subjects and citizens on the island, but he politely addressed the letter to President Pétion and requested permission to visit Port-au-Prince to discuss the matter between them as educated men. An invitation was duly extended. Lavesse also took it upon himself to write to Christophe, but his letter was far less conciliatory. Writing to General Christophe, Mr. Lavesse described himself as the precursor of peace and reconciliation, but was quick to urge Christophe to proclaim Louis XVIII as his sovereign. If it was nobility the Haitian leader required, then a title would be granted to him as a servant of the French crown. Beyond this, there were only veiled threats. Bonaparte's attempt to reconquer Saint-Domingue had failed as a result of the war in Europe. But now the French king had an army of 500,000 men free to be deployed. Compel us not, General, to make soldiers of the Negroes we are now importing from Africa. Compel us not to have recourse to all possible means of destruction. Lavesse closed by appending a copy of his far more respectful address to Pétion in the hope of strengthening the French position by further inflaming the division between the two halves of Haiti. The arrival of Lavesse's letter at Christophe's palace provoked outrage even before it was opened. 10 years had passed since we had any communication with the French, wrote Vasty, who attended the meeting where it was presented to Christophe. Vasty went on to say, a host of contradictory conjectures as to the object of the French was instantly afloat. What did they propose? Did they mean to recognize our independence or to re-enslave us? Did they mean to offer compensation for the injuries they had done us? Had they not injured us sufficiently without wishing to do us further mischief? The packets were yet unopened, and we already viewed them with horror. Christophe calmly ordered the State Council to convene to decide a response. Christophe said, "Let us begin by doing our duty. If General Pétion and the inhabitants of the Southwest do theirs, they will act as we do. If they mean to disgrace and ruin themselves, would you wish us to follow their example?" A surprise attendee of the council meeting was Mr. Montesquieu. The Frenchman granted clemency for his alleged role in the Amethyst Mutiny. Montesquieu suggested the French plan was to send Christophe into exile and that the only route to national prosperity was to pledge loyalty to the King of France. In response, he was nearly thrown from a balcony. As the letter was read aloud again, the meeting became so febrile that Vasty's pen was barely able to capture the outrage. Among the members, there were some who had borne the yoke of the French. The marks yet visible on their mutilated limbs attested the length and cruelty of their sufferings and the barbarity of our tyrants. As others remember their loved ones drowned, burned, or torn to pieces by the colonist dogs, they pledged on their swords to defend their country to their dying breath with cries of "Long live the king, liberty or death." Christophe responded and said, "The eyes of the whole world are fixed upon us. Our conduct then should be such as to confound our detractors and to justify their opinion formed of us by philanthropists. Let us rally. One wish alone animates us all, that of exterminating our tyrants. Let us fight gloriously. Let us rather be blotted out of the rank of nations than resign our liberty and independence. Should we chance to die previous to the consolidation of your rights, remember our conduct, and should your tyrants endanger your freedom and independence, exhume our bones. They will conduct you anew to victory and make you triumph over your implacable and everlasting enemies." This was the atmosphere into which Malouet's envoy, Medina, had arrived. A figure better chosen to further antagonize Christophe could hardly have been imagined. Vasty described him as a renegade Spaniard. He had owned plantations near Santiago and Santo Domingo and served under General Ferran, making several incursions in the Haitian territory, including one to Wanament, where several women and children were killed. As a result, he was arrested almost the instant he set foot on Haitian soil. A search of his belongings quickly revealed the secret instructions from Malouet. On the 17th of November, the eve of the anniversary of the Battle of Vertières, the cathedral in Cap Henri was full for a highly unusual service attended by the king. Medina was paraded before the king and the crowd and made a stand on a bench. After mass, his secret instructions were read aloud, followed by a transcript of the detailed interrogation he had been subjected to. Medina revealed the French plans to revive slavery, including mass deportations and a purge of the population, and all these above the age of 6 years old. The congregation gasped in horror. Vasty took to the pulpit to rouse them further with his passionate oratory. Vasty said, "Friends, let nothing stop the anger you feel upon hearing these words. Slave and master, the tocsin of liberty has sounded. Grab your arms, let your torches be lit, let the carnage begin and vengeance be taken." Christophe's newspaper reported that Medina, believing that he saw 1,000 bayonets pointed towards him, collapsed in fear. What a pity that his two colleagues, Mr. Lavesse and Draverman, could not be by his side. What a lovely trio they would have made. Medina was hauled off to prison, and though his ultimate fate was not recorded, it is widely believed that he died in captivity very soon after. The performance in the cathedral was designed to echo far beyond its walls. The royal printing presses reprinted Medina's secret instructions in full, along with the transcript of his interrogation, where he revealed more details of the French plot. These were accompanied by copies of Mr. Lavesse's letters to Pétion and were distributed widely as proof that only Christophe was capable of protecting the Haitian people against the intrigues of Paris. A slew of other texts followed, in which rioters including Vasty, Prévost, and Dupuis set out to defend Haitian sovereignty against the slanders of the French colonial lobby. This use of the written word as a form of intellectual national defense had been a practice in progress throughout 1814. In his notes to Bound and Malouet, published earlier in the year, Vasty had already set out a strident rebuttal to the French minister's nostalgia for the slave system in his book on Saint-Domingue. But this short pamphlet only set the scene for the arrival of Vasty's masterwork, The Colonial System Unveiled, whose publication in the capital in October proved perfectly timed for the arrival of Malouet's agents. Now, listen, go to my playlist section. I already read that book on my channel already. The Colonial System Unveiled, written by Vasty back in 1814. Go check that out in my playlist section. 5 parts, amazing book, legendary book. Came out from the Kingdom of Haiti in 1814. Go check that out after this one. Let's continue. The Colonial System Unveiled was an extraordinary text that gave not just an account of the horrors enacted by the French in Saint-Domingue, but indicted the entire system of European colonialism itself. At last, it is known, this secret full of horrors, read this epigraph. The colonial system means the domination of whites. It means the massacre and enslavement of blacks. After tracing the destruction of the Taino people at the hands of Spain, Vasty turned his attention to France's depredations and offered his readers an intimate catalog of French atrocities. To do this, he collected the testimonies of those who had suffered on the plantations and offered himself as a witness for the hundreds of thousands dead who had never survived Saint-Domingue. I'm telling y'all, man, go read that book, man. Go read that book. Go read that book. That book should have millions of views. But for whatever reason, when I bring these amazing documents, these amazing historical testimonies to y'all, it don't get no views, man. It don't even get no views, man. Like, I don't understand, right? But if I came with some, some other type of salacious type of topic, some type of, current events type of topic, man, thousands of views. But when I bring these, these legendary historical accounts, these crazy series that I start, it don't be getting no views, man. It don't get no views. So obviously, y'all don't really got love for the ancestors like that, it seems. But anyway, let's continue. European abolitionist tracts of the period typically gloss over slavery's inherent violence through euphemisms such as the ill use of slaves, but Vasty spared no detail in presenting his readers with accounts of men, women, and children maimed, flogged to death, and burned alive. Each account was accompanied by the names of the French settlers, the plantation owners, and magistrates who had perpetrated the crimes. The charge sheet was unanswerable. To France's shame, not a single one of the monsters we have just cited has suffered a penalty that his foul deeds merit. Colonists, those of you who still draw breath, cite me a single one of your kind whose guilty head was struck down by the sword of the law. I defy you to prove me wrong, Vasty said. By denying the humanity of Africans, Vasty declared that Europe's colonial project was flawed from the outset, and his claim to civilized values was based on pure sophistry. Only Haiti's revolution had fulfilled the potential of the Enlightenment by recognizing that all people had been created equal. In the South, Pétion had initially felt confident enough in his position to allow the announcement of the French royal envoy's arrival in Port-au-Prince on the 24th of October in the Telegraph newspaper. Despite the claims of Vasty and others, Pétion showed considerable resilience in defending Haitian sovereignty while maintaining that he was open to a variety of approaches to settle relations with France. In his exchanges of letters with Mr. Lavesse, Pétion suggested a possible compromise whereby Haiti might pay a sort of indemnity to buy recognition of its independence. Now you see, I just gotta say it, man. I just gotta say it. It's another reason why I have hatred for the Southern mulatto regime, because they were the ones that made a suggestion. They always make it seem like the French forced Haiti to pay reparations. No, it was the leaders of the Southern mulatto regime, the sons of the white men, the sons of the white colonists, the sons of the French colonists. They were the ones who put that offer on the table. They were the ones who made a suggestion that, yes, we will pay our fathers, we will pay our brothers, we will pay our French relatives back in France an indemnity payment, a debt. We'll pay for recognition. We'll pay reparations to France. It was the Southern mulatto regime. It was the sons of the white colonists that made the suggestion to France. They were the ones that put it on the table. That's another reason why I wish Christophe would have killed them all. Christophe should have marched in Port-au-Prince and killed them all. Let's continue. In the eyes of the North, the idea of paying a financial penalty on top of the blood price already borne by the Haitian people was proof of Pétion's treason. I repeat, in the eyes of the North, the idea of paying a financial penalty on top of the blood price already borne by the Haitian people was proof of Pétion's treason. Vasty said, "Can you contemplate this prospect without shuddering in horror? Who is the Haitian vile enough to want to pay his portion of this tribute?" Yo, Alexander Pétion should have been killed. He should have died. Jean-Pierre Boyer should have been killed. He should have died. The Southern Republic should have been taken over by the kingdom. Unfortunately, after Christophe died, it was the Republic that took over the kingdom. And after the kingdom fell, it was then the Southern mulatto regime was in prime position to pay reparations and finalize the deal with the French. That's the real story. That's what happened. Not the rewritten account by the Europeans where they make it seem like, oh, they marched on Haiti and we forced the Haitians to pay. No, you didn't. Because when Christophe was in power, when Christophe had the Citadel, when Christophe had 10 warships docked in the harbor, you didn't want no smoke. You didn't want no problems. You didn't want no beef. It was only when your sons came to power, your mixed race sons came to power. After Christophe died, that's when reparations was finally secured. But Christophe should have marched on the South and killed every one of them boys, man. That's what should have happened. That's what should have happened. Let's continue. The kingdom's release of the French papers proved damning. Within weeks, Pétion was forced to publish his correspondence with Mr. Lavesse in an attempt to demonstrate his good intentions. Pétion defended the sacred right of hospitality that he had extended to the French envoys and stated that any blame for the affair was to be found only in France. When news of the debacle reached France, it proved equally embarrassing. The mission was publicly disavowed and Mr. Lavesse was hung out to dry, actions made easy by the unexpected death of Malouet in September. In Christophe's newspaper, this was the final proof that French intentions could never be trusted and only a fool like Pétion could fall for their sweet words. Christophe said, "Their hearts will never change. Our slavery and our destruction, that is the only thought that occupies them, even as they caress and flatter us." The Malouet affair was a reminder that Haiti's position in the world was still not guaranteed. From his palace high in the citadel, Christophe dusted down Dessalines' old plan for national defense and put the nation on high alert in case France sent another armada to the shores. He was determined that they would land in a country that would give them no refuge. Kindling was to be gathered in all the towns so they could be set ablaze at the first sight of French sails. Bridges were to be broken, roads made impassable, and even the banks of rivers cut to stymie the invaders. All the livestock will be driven to the interior, where stores of food were ordered to be laid to feed the population as it took shelter around the kingdom's many mountain forts, Christophe declared. In the first war of independence, we had to encounter every sort of privation. This time, we shall be in want of nothing. You will have for yourselves and families necessaries of every description, which I have collected for the wants of the army and the people. Before now, we were obligated to traverse the mountains without a place for shelter. Our warlike stores, our treasures, were all at the mercy of the enemy. Now, this is no more the case. We can defend ourselves securely in impregnable citadels. Christophe also recognized that all of Haiti would need to act together to repel the French. He said, "No disrespect that General Pétion can offer to me should prevent me from discharging my duty by giving my fellow citizens the necessary information to prevent their falling into the snares laid by our enemies." In February 1815, Christophe sent 4 envoys to Port-au-Prince, all of whom had formerly lived in the South. They arrived in Port-au-Prince wearing gold braid and powdered wigs, hoping that their fine court dress would demonstrate the splendor of the kingdom. But their bright costume was mocked on the street as if they were performers in a carnival parade. Things did not improve when they presented their credentials. The people of Haiti can no longer hesitate to reunite and offer a massive resistance to the imminent attacks which our oppressors threaten us. Julien Prévost wrote in his diplomatic letter to Pétion, "A unity that will surely be made in concord with the wishes of the Haitians in this sector under your command." Christophe again offered forgiveness to those who would submit to the crown and admission to the kingdom's hereditary nobility for Republican leaders who proclaimed their loyalty. Given Pétion's willingness to treat with Mr. Lavesse and apparently eager offer to sell his country back to France, said Christophe's secretary, it was only his king's magnanimity that allowed such terms to be offered. Pétion's response was derisive. Christophe's envoys cut such ridiculous figures that the idea of bending the knee could only be scoffed at. In his official reply to the mission, Pétion reminded Prévost of the events of 1802, even mentioning the fate of Christophe's son Ferdinand in a manner that could only have intended to wound. Pétion said, "You speak to me, General, of amnesty, pardon, forgetting the past, of paternal authority of a monarch, of ranks and distinctions, of titles and hereditary nobility. We were far removed from those strange and unseemly ideas when I asked Christophe to leave the cap in order to establish the gallows, and when I awakened his distrust of the French, whom he understood so little, that shortly before he had entrusted his son to General Boudet to take him to France. You do not speak to me of this period in your letter. He ignores that we are all enlightened on our true interests and that all the means of seduction to deceive us have been used up, that we are and want to be free, and that we do not recognize masters and do not want kings, whoever they may be." Pétion pointed to Christophe's crimes of aggression against the Republic and wondered how a guilty man might offer to pardon the innocent. Should a French army indeed return, he concluded, they will be defeated again by the Haitian people, despite the pretensions of an imaginary monarchy, and not because of them. Pétion's forthrightness caught the mood in Port-au-Prince. A month later, he was re-elected by the Senate to serve another 4-year term as president. The sniping was continued by the Haitian press. With the border between the kingdom and the Republic now a seemingly permanent condition, each side took to publishing closely written pamphlets and counter-pamphlets expounding their beliefs and hoping to convince the opposing side of the superiority of their position. A steady succession of articles and reprints from the Royal Gazette of Haiti, placed in British newspapers, further raised the kingdom's international image and touted the progress that Christophe was bringing to the country. Jean-Gabriel Pelletier was good at publicity, but as the events of 1814 prompted a renewed effort to win Haiti's acceptance on the international stage, Christophe decided that he had been a poor lobbyist. Since his appointment, Pelletier had fallen out with his fellow envoy Thomas Richardson over the non-payment of an order of uniforms for the Haitian army, resulting in Richardson unsuccessfully trying to sue him for libel.
Money ran through Peltier's fingers like water. In 1812, he briefly declared bankruptcy and was forced to sell his furniture. The French essayist Chateaubriand, who saw him in London, described him as eaten by vermin, a libertine, a rebellious subject, making plenty of money and consuming the same. Diplomatic correspondent for Monsieur Le Comte de Limonade, drinking at champagne, the appointments for which he was paid in sugar. Admiral Thomas Goodall had also fallen from favor. In 1813, he became embroiled in a divorce scandal after discovering that his lawyer had been sleeping with his Covent Garden actress wife. Christophe needed new voices to speak on his behalf. Christophe's approaches to William Wilberforce were to prove far more productive. The member of parliament and the evangelist who had helped steer the abolition of the slave trade through parliament in 1807 was thrilled to receive an approach from the kingdom. In January 1815, he wrote to his fellow abolitionist Zachary Macaulay that he had been excited to receive a surprise package from Haiti. Prevost's letter has not survived, but he would no doubt have written of the high regard in which Wilberforce was held in Haiti, recounting how details of the abolition bill had been reprinted in the national newspapers. A number of pamphlets were also enclosed, including the papers relating to the Malouette affair, to help convince Wilberforce of the help that Haiti needed to protect itself from France. It was the second approach from Haiti Wilberforce had received in only a few months. In July 1814, when news of the French Restoration was still fresh in Haiti, but before his correspondence with Mr. Lavesse was published, Pétion sent one of his secretaries to London to lobby for the Republic. In a letter to the Prime Minister, Lord Liverpool, he asked the British government to stand as an honest broker in negotiating recognition for Haiti's independence from France. It was the first time that Pétion formally put the issue of payment of an indemnity on the table. See, it wasn't the French who forced Haiti to pay. It was their mixed-race sons who controlled the South that put the offer on the table. They were the ones that put the idea in the air. Let's continue. Pétion offered to pay 1% of all customs export receipts to the French crown and a further 5% to the former owners of plantations until the value of their establishments was recovered. Pétion even tacitly recognized Christophe's control of the North and asked only that if France opened relations with him, that they not recognize him as king. Lord Liverpool followed Castlereaux's precedent and ignored the approach, but Pétion's secretary sent a copy to Wilberforce asking for his help. He apparently agreed to the sentiments in the petition, but before matters could go further, Pétion's secretary passed away. Pétion later wrote to Wilberforce directly to praise the abolitionist work and warned him against dealing with Christophe, but by this time, Wilberforce had decided to fully throw his weight behind the Haitian king. Wilberforce thought himself to be a pragmatic man and supported the principle of gradual rather than immediate emancipation from slavery, but he recognized a clear opportunity in the Kingdom of Haiti. Wilberforce said, "Providence has thrown in our way an opportunity such as has seldom been afforded of sowing the seeds of civilization and still more of Christian faith in this hitherto benighted quarter of the world where, when they have once taken root, they will gradually diffuse themselves throughout all the colored inhabitants of the Western Hemisphere." Still, Wilberforce had doubts about whether a private individual, even a member of parliament such as himself, should enter into what could be construed as diplomatic correspondence, and decided to forward all future communications to Lord Liverpool, trusting that the Prime Minister's considerable religious principle would demand attention be paid to the prospects he saw dawning in Haiti. Wilberforce also began to excitedly share his Haitian correspondence with his friends in high society. Wilberforce also invited England's other great abolitionist, Thomas Clarkson, to write to Christophe and offer his services. While waiting for a response, Christophe embarked on a 3-week tour of the kingdom's western province in April 1815. In the town of Petit Rivière, he held a large military review and visited the site of Dessalines' heroic victory against the French at Catapeau. Over 4 successive days, crowds gathered to catch sight of their king and present him with petitions. According to the Royal Gazette of Haiti, Christophe welcomed all with kindness and did justice to those who had cause for complaint. Plantations were toured, farmers performed dances to show love to the king, and pensions were dispersed for members of the Order of St. Henri. Together with the gifts and favors which His Majesty has showered on the people, he must have poured a considerable sum of money into this province, and it can be said with truth, wherever His Majesty has passed, he has brought prosperity, peace, and happiness, wrote an anonymous member of the court. Before returning to the palace, Christophe hosted Captain James of the Royal Navy ship, the HMS Tenaillus, in the harbor to take on supplies, whose men were heard to praise the good order of the city garrison. In London, there were the first signs of royal progress of a different kind as Christophe won another English supporter to his cause, someone he had met in person during the Revolution. In 1798, he had sentenced a British Army officer, Marcus Ransford, to death for espionage, only for Toussaint Louverture to have him deported. Ransford had since been won over to the Haitian cause. He published a book about the Revolution describing Haiti as a pure emanation of humanity, and by the end of 1814 had started giving public speeches in London in support of Christophe and his court. For this, he was granted the honorary rank of Lieutenant General in the Haitian army. It was in this capacity on the 23rd of February that Marcus Ransford attended the Prince Regent's levee at Carleton's house, in which he was able to present the future King of England with a copy of Christophe's plan for national defense, issued in the aftermath of the Malouet affair. This was exactly the type of lobbying that Christophe had hoped to achieve in London. Julien Prévost wrote to Ransford, ranking him alongside the incomparable Britons who had campaigned to abolish the slave trade. Ransford volunteered to come to Haiti to join the army directly, but the offer was declined on the basis that Ransford was more valued to the kingdom where he was. Christophe said, "It will be much better to place you in London with an adequate establishment to defend our cause." Christophe had equally come to understand that his campaign for international legitimacy had to be a mix of soft power as well as diplomatic lobbying. Just as his royal tour showed him performing the role of king to his people, 1815 saw a new focus on using the kingdom's wealth to cement the idea that Haiti was a power, not just to be accepted, but also admired. Simply put, if Christophe wanted to be recognized as a king, he had to spend like one. The second half of the year saw a succession of articles in British newspapers commenting on the luxury goods that Christophe was buying in London, wherever possible commissioned from the same craftsmen patronized by the Prince Regent. His jewelers created a diamond-hilted sword for Christophe, along with epaulets studded with precious stones, both of which were put on display to an awed public. A complete bone china dinner service was ordered from the Spode Pottery Works in Staffordshire. At the center of each gilt-rimmed plate, a crowned phoenix rose from flames set against a deep blue shield surmounted by the royal crown. Gold and silver plate was ordered from Milroy Sadler of Lombard Street, including a gilt bronze ice pail bearing the royal arms. Just as Vasty's books aimed to demonstrate that Haiti was a true embodiment of Enlightenment values, Christophe's high spending was designed to show that his kingdom's splendor could match anything in Europe, and it was all paid for by free rather than enslaved labor. In October 1815, the Morning Chronicle dedicated nearly half a column to describe in great detail the very superb dresses for the Queen and Princesses of Haiti have just been finished by one of our fashionable dressmakers. White satin was chosen for Queen Maya Louise, embroidered with sunflowers and fringed with gold, and a similarly decorated train that looped up to form a drapery with gold tassels. The outfit was topped off with a rich plume of white feathers and combs. The gown for the princesses was lilac satin with the gold and silver fringe, silver tissue sleeves, and a train with large red roses. Her younger sister Athénaïe's dress was in a pink cordon satin, decorated with silver roses and lilies of the valley. The price tag was not mentioned, but another bill for the royal dresses came to £3,700. Of all the items bought for Christophe, none was more splendid than the series of state carriages put on display to the London public to the great acclaim in November by the coachmakers Crowther and Tapp of Charles Street. The main 8-horse carriage had a sky blue body with an entirely Nouvelle shape, designed to give extra shade from the Caribbean sun. Its panels were painted with the king's coat of arms, encircled with an elegant border of flowers and images of military and naval trophies. Rich gilt moldings framed the whole of the bodywork, and the cornices of the roof were surmounted with golden phoenixes with a crown at the center. The interior was lined in velvet embroidered with the emblem of the Order of St. Henri and fringed with gold drapery. No one who saw it could fail to be awed by its magnificence. Only mildly less extravagant was the Prince Royal's emerald green cabriolet with his emblazoned arms, with chased silver fixings and lined with yellow and green Morocco leather. The coaches for the princesses had matching lilac panels with the initials entwined in silver. In total, 23 carriages were built by Crowther and Tapp for the royal court, plus harnesses for 119 horses and crimson saddles with gold lace and silver-clawed tiger skin saddle cloths. When the carriages were due to be shipped to Haiti, the Morning Chronicle sighed to its readers. It is to be lamented that more time is not allowed the public to witness one of the grandest specimens of art and elegance ever combined in one piece of work of the kind that has been sent from the country. The total cost of the work was estimated to have been £12,000, with Crowther and Tapp hoping to clear a profit of around £10,000 on the commission. William Crowther had won the order in person. In 1814, he had visited Barbados on business, taking with him several carriages as examples of his work. His ship also landed in Christophe's capital, and by the time he left, he had won the commission directly from Christophe's secretary. After the London display had won such acclaim, the carriages were packed up to be shipped to Haiti. As well as the ships, the cargo included the dresses for the queen and princesses, more jewelry, cut glass chandeliers, harnesses, and tack for 2 regiments of cavalry, and a marble copy of Irish-born Italian sculptor Tornorelli's celebrated bust of George III. In total, another £6,000 worth of goods. That the King of Haiti spent such sums in Britain was noted with pride in many newspapers, with one commenting that it is highly gratifying to observe the constant and increasing superiority our manufacturers are daily obtaining in those ornamental embellishments, for which but a few years ago, enormous sums of money were annually transmitted to other countries. The ship arrived in Christophe's capital in the middle of January 1816, where the Royal Gazette of Haiti reported on the infinite number of goods and luxuries it was carrying. Also on the ship was a black gentleman, Mr. Prince Saunders, whose passage had been paid for by Wilberforce. On learning that he was carrying letters of introduction from his illustrious persons in London, Christophe immediately summoned him to the palace for an audience. Saunders' arrival was the first tangible proof that Wilberforce could provide more than just support for the kingdom, and his background allowed him to form a bond with Christophe deeper than anything a white English abolitionist might offer. Saunders was born in Connecticut in 1775 and had worked as a teacher in Boston's African school, where he formed a close connection with the founder of the Americans' first African Baptist Church, Thomas Paul. Together, the two became advocates for black education as well as African American immigration to Africa to escape the racial prejudices of the United States. In 1815, they sailed to London, where they made their connection with Wilberforce. Saunders proved an able high society networker. By omitting the title Mr. from his visiting cards, he flattered many hosts into thinking that they were dealing with a real prince, a notion he was slow to disabuse them of. Before long, Saunders was a regular invitee to fashionable parties. In 1816, the noted society hostess, the Countess of Cork, was said to have been unable to have a party without His Highness, Prince Saunders. He proved an equally adept host as well as guest, and in July of that year, held a ball attended by more than 70 people, including the American ambassador to London, John Quincy Adams. The two had previously met at a banquet hosted by Prince Frederick, Duke of Sussex. When Saunders arrived in the kingdom, he brought with him more than just promises of connections to London society. His luggage contained doses of smallpox vaccination, along with a pamphlet on its benefits addressed to Christophe. Saunders had reportedly delayed his passage to Haiti so that he could correctly learn how to administer the vaccine. And the Royal Gazette of Haiti soon reported excitedly that the first children at the palace had received their first doses, praising Wilberforce for sending such valuable help. Christophe ordered that every parish should start producing a vaccine so that a countrywide vaccination program could be rolled out. While Saunders prepared to administer the vaccine, Crowther was getting reacquainted with the capital. He would have been welcomed by the familiar face of Baron Dupuis, the royal interpreter who served as the main point of contact for anyone arriving to do business in the kingdom, and whose ready wit and supple intelligence was appreciated by the resident foreign merchant community. He would have had plenty to occupy him while he was waiting to be paid, arranging for horses to be put onto harness for the 24 carriages he had brought from London, and not least overseeing the 8 draft horses that would have required special instructions to learn how to pull the king's coach. We do not know if Crowther won praise for his work in a personal royal audience, but 2 months later after he landed, a payment order was issued to him by Baron de Chalier, chief secretary to the Minister of Finance. The invoice would have been personally approved by Christophe, who still retained his need to micromanage the smallest affairs of state. He regularly issued orders for payments to foreign merchants, specifying the market rates for sugar and coffee to be paid out. In one instance, he refused the offer of a merchant in St. Mark to buy government sugar at 6 goods per half hundredweight, instructing him to offer 8 goods so that he might allow the merchant to save face by haggling the price down to 7. Payments for all imported goods were made in sugar and coffee, as the export of all gold and silver, including specie, was forbidden under the kingdom's customs laws. Crowther was forced into the role of commodity trader to recoup his investment. 10 days after the payment order was issued, however, Crowther signed for the receipt of 147,000 livres of raw sugar priced at 12 goods per hundredweight and 152,000 livres of coffee at 22 goods per hundredweight. In total, the goods were worth roughly 9,255 pounds sterling. The receipt states that the payment was made for supplies and various objects. It is impossible to know if this was the sum total for a shipment or a proportion of it, but this was far from the profit he hoped to turn on the trip. Crowther's son later claimed that not only had his father received less than the market rate for the sugar and coffee, but he had also been charged 40% import tax for the goods. Customs documents from 1817 set the import duty for carriages and harnesses at 10%. Either way, Crowther's trip concluded with him being unable to cover all his expenses. He was able to remit goods worth 12,000 pounds sterling back to England, but was then forced to sail home through the United States after being refused passage on a ship that had brought him after a dispute with a captain. As the carriages were being delivered to the palace, they would have passed farmers in the fields who had no idea of the drama that was to befall their creator, all for a slice of the wealth produced by their labor. As the account of the royal tour in the Royal Gazette of Haiti had made clear, plantation agriculture was still at the heart of Christophe's vision for the country. The king had visited several plantations and depots where produce was stored, traveling by horse to better allow him to talk to the farmers and encourage their work. Christophe asked whether they were being paid the revenue due to them. He listened with great interest to those who had some cause for complaint and told them to approach him with confidence. So important were the export crops they were growing that in the town of Petit Rivière, Christophe ordered Jean Chevreau, a local Royal Dalmat officer, to be awarded the Cross of the Order of St. Henri for the just and equitable way in which he directed the farmers under his command in the noble labors of agriculture. Petite Rivière was in coffee country, and its produce would have been sent down the Artibonite River to be stored in a government warehouse in St. Marc to await export. There were 16 of those warehouses spread across the kingdom, and the survival of a ledger from one of these in Cap Henri gives a rare insight into the state of agricultural production under Christophe's monarchy. Over dozens of pages of closely written column entries, the Schomburg ledger records deposits of coffee and sugar produced near Cap Henri between February 1814 and October 1816. In February 1816, while Crowther was awaiting for payment, 7,000 leaves of processed coffee were deposited in the storehouse produced by 56 plantations, primarily from the Acul du Nord parish, a few kilometers west of Cap Henri. Of this, 295 leaves were the product of 4 plantations, of which at least 3 were run by women. The ledger records the names of the managers as Chiba, Rosalie, and Catherine Chirin and Mary. More than a third of the managers in the ledger are identifiably female. The 4 managers deposited 78, 75, 39, and 103 leaves of coffee respectively, which made up half of that month's production and represented the plantation's net profits. The rest was due in state tax and the quarter share given to the farmers who had grown the beans. At the end of the month, the storehouse held a total of 79,000 leaves of coffee. As the year progressed, the harvest grew larger. In May, 153 plantations in the same parish deposited 42,000 leaves of coffee and a further 12,000 in September. This process would have been repeated in storehouses across the entire country. Under Christophe's code of laws, prices for the produce had to be published so that buyers could ensure they were receiving a fair price. A state representative issued a certificate to confirm its quality and gave advance notice of when payments were due. The recording of the names of the plantation managers was especially important, as these were the people who controlled the payment. In the case of the managers in La Cour du Nord, this would probably have been issued in nearby the town of Limbé by Joseph Casimir. Every month, Chiba, Rosalie, Catherine Chirin, and Mary would travel to the town to deposit their coffee and receive the payments for their farmers. The quarter share was divided according to their role. Farmers received a share, while the conductor who ran the work gangs received 3 shares. Skilled workers involved in processing were given 2 shares, with 1.5 given to any midwives on a property. Workers deemed to have worked insufficiently hard could have their pay deducted to as little as a quarter share. Christophe regarded idleness and laziness as a moral failing. Such was the strictness with which the Royal Dalement officers enforced the system that stories abounded that Christophe's eyes were everywhere watching over the workers, and that his English telescope could observe everyone in the kingdom. One English resident noted that there was no laziness under Christophe's regime, for he permitted none. Managers had to provide a written list of all the workers on their plantation to be countersigned by the local justice of the peace, who would then be personally liable for any abuses of the resulting payments. The landlord or owner was deliberately excluded from the involvement in the quarter payments. In the case of the 4 plantations in La Cour du Nord, this was the Comte de Wanamène, an intimate of Christophe who was equerry to the queen, inspector of the royal stud farms, and an officer in the royal garde du corps. His wife was governess to Princess Améthyste and would regularly accompany her charge in one of the carriages made by Crowther, carriages that had possibly been partly paid for by coffee grown on the family land. Just as the ledger showed female plantation managers, the Comtesse may have even been a landowner herself. The Princess of Limbé, wife of Paul Romain, regularly appears in the ledger as the owner of several coffee plantations. One expected landowner who appears only infrequently in the Schomburg ledger was Christophe himself. Some foreign merchants aware of the close interest that Christophe took in both agriculture and commodity pricing claimed that it was his aim to personally monopolize all trade in the country. Evidence from the ledger suggests that his personal interest in plantation ownership was relatively modest. The first entry for His Majesty does not come until August 1814, when 8 plantations in Millau, Choiseul, and Dubray made deposits of coffee. All were in the immediate vicinity of the palace, with some on the mountain slopes directly visible from the windows of the king's apartments. Given Christophe's love of touring plantations to check on the farmers, it is tempting to speculate on the relationship he may have had with the workers there. The area was certainly productive, and over 51,000 leaves of raw coffee was deposited in the warehouses in the first 3 months of 1815 alone. 3 managers are mentioned by name: Vincent, Louise, and Delachaise, the last of whom is listed in the 1816 Royal Almanac as being a clerk to the Justice of the Peace. From mid-1815, Christophe's plantations disappeared from the registry entirely. Presumably, the produce was still sent to Cap Henri, but recorded in a ledger that has subsequently been lost. When the state finances were rearranged in April 1817, with the formal creation of a civil list, these plantations were included among the 16 that were formerly listed as property of the crown. When Prince Saunders published extracts from Christophe's Code of Laws in London, they were presented as proof of Christophe's aim to ameliorate the condition and improve the character of the humblest class, namely that of the plantation laborers. There was little talk of royal carriages, rather the reciprocal obligations between the proprietor and the planter and the moral value of labor.
In February 1816, it was noted that there were no deposits made that month of sugar, and that the warehouses had a balance of just 11,000 livres. Unlike fast-cropping coffee, which could be left to grow with minimum intervention, sugar production was a slow and highly labor-intensive process. The cane had to be pressed for its juice immediately after harvesting, which was then boiled off. The syrup was then placed in clay molds to dry. Christophe's code of law stipulated that this process required 3 months to produce sugar of sufficient quality to export. But while coffee boomed, the ledger shows that sugar production was in decline. In the year up to October 1816, just 26 plantations produced sugar to be lodged in the warehouse. 2 plantations owned by the Queen's brother, Prince Noel, the only royal who appears to have maintained a sugar interest, produced 2,000 livres in December 1815, while 2 plantations at Breda, where Toussaint Louverture was born, managed to lodge little more than a double that in July 1816 under the ownership of the Count of Henri. Even the Galifet plantation, whose sugar riches had been celebrated in Saint-Domingue, recorded production of sugar just 12,000 livres. The Schomburg ledger records a small but significant year-on-year decline in sugar production. On top of that, only raw brown sugar was recorded in either the ledger or in transactions with foreign merchants. The more highly prized refined white sugar that Saint-Domingue had been famous for was no longer produced anywhere. Despite the relative decline of sugar production, the booming coffee plantations and the arrival of specially commissioned luxury goods from London appeared enough to convince a casual observer in 1816 that the kingdom was growing ever stronger. Christophe likely believed that he had finally solved the problem of balancing the needs of the state, the landowner, and the farmer. The nobility and the army were invested in the system in a way that Dessalines had never achieved, and there was a strong police force to enforce the system, however imperfectly. The rewarding of officers like Jean Chevreul was an important part of this. The Royal Gazette of Haiti suggested that, such was their dedication to Christophe, the royal Dalmats clothed and equipped themselves voluntarily at their own expense. The sole public admission that the production of export crops lagged behind expectations came in the Royal Gazette of Haiti on the 23rd of July, 1816, which announced that the king had ordered an expansion of plantations and was planning another tour to learn for himself what progress was being made to improve the national production. The admission was easy to miss, coming as it did straight after a breathless account of the celebrations held for the Prince Royal's birthday. This was the image the kingdom wanted to produce. Military parades, lavish banquets, and toasts from attendees, whose cries of joy were almost drowned out by cannon salutes and cheers from the public. In the evening, the whole of the palace was illuminated for a ball that lasted until 2 hours after midnight. As usual, members of the resident foreign community were invited to marvel at the spectacle. Even more extravagant celebrations were held the following month in the capital to celebrate the Queen, held on the 15th of August. Over a period of 12 days, the party was the grandest spectacle held in the country since the coronation. The official account was printed over 4 successive issues of the Royal Gazette of Haiti before being expanded into a 50-page book. William Crowther's carriages were the centerpiece of a royal procession the day before the party from the palace to the capital, along roads that had been specially leveled for the event. If they had impressed audiences when displayed in the gloomy November London, their brilliance must surely have dazzled the crowd to watch them under the bright Caribbean sun. A military escort of artillery, cavalry, and infantry preceded the king's carriage, its sky blue body matching the uniforms of the royal household dragoons. It was followed by the Queen's coach, also drawn by 8 horses, as were the separate coaches for the Prince Royal and the princesses. Behind them were coaches for 6 and 4 horses apiece, each carrying a female member of court. Princess Jean, the Queen's lady-in-waiting, the princess's governesses, the Countess of Wanament and Trier-Rouge, the princesses of Limbe, and the wives of the most prominent members of the court, including Baron de Vasti and Baron Dupuis. Bringing up the train, an infinite number of people of all ranks and sexes followed the procession in carriages and on horseback, eager to join the festivities. On the arrival at Eau du Cap, Christophe took to horseback and led the procession beneath a garlanded Victory Arch and along Rue Espagnole, riding past the ruins of the hotel where he had toured as a boy. The royal scribe was enraptured. The long row of superb carriages, all richly harnessed and stretching into the distance, the beauty and splendor of the uniforms of all the troops at arms, the stir of the people, and the shouts of joy, joined to the salutes of cannon, gave this parade a martial air that rendered it truly victorious. In the evening, the city lights blazed and fireworks and music entertained the crowds that had gathered in the main square to join the celebrations. Events began the following morning with a salute from Cap Henri's forts and a breakfast where the gathered nobility expressed their loyalty and affection for the mother of the nation. Marie-Louise responded by promising that the happiness of the Haitian people will always be the object of my only concern and the greatest attention. With breakfast concluded, heralds then led the king, queen, and assembled royal household to the cathedral for mass.
A luncheon feast for 400 guests then followed, held in a specially constructed hall and arranged by the Baronesses of Ferrières and Dupuis, who had decorated the interior with wooden paneling, mirrors, paintings, and a dizzying numbers of chandeliers. In the evening, the royal party attended a performance of the comic opera in the newly built theater, before ending the day with more fireworks and a grand ball. The next day, it was the turn of Jean-Pierre Richard, the Duke of Marmelade, to host a banquet. Now in his 60s, the city governor was known by visiting Royal Navy officers for his hospitality. In addition to the royal family and nobility, he made sure to invite 10 English merchants and 3 Americans, who were no doubt delighted when Christophe led toast to George III and U.S. President James Madison, along with assorted other brother monarchs in Europe and the immortal Wilberforce. In turn, the king would have been flattered by the speech given in response by the British merchant Mr. White. He said, "I am English and accustomed to expressing my feelings freely. I have observed the customs and laws of the peoples of all countries I have visited, and well, gentlemen, I will tell you the truth. I have seen the King of Haiti at the head of his troops. I have examined the richness of the uniforms, the conduct and discipline of the Haitian army. I have observed the customs and studied the laws of this nation. In your position today, you must fear nobody. You are invincible." Now, I think we could end part 9 right here. The Queen of Haiti's birthday celebration. I did a video on that as well. I can't find it, but if you search on my channel something like, the Queen of Haiti, the Queen of Haiti birthday celebration, the Queen of Haiti's birthday, you'll see I had a long video, like about an hour long, where I read a newspaper article that discussed this very same event that they're talking about in the book right here. But anyways, man, it's your boy Naval, that's Salim, back in the Billy, yes indeed. Cash App in the description. Support the album, man. Support the album. Peace.
Feel like I'm 75. Know that your team be full of them traders, you know that can never be mine. I'm grabbing a thought when I drive. I'm back in my zone and we on. She said that she ready to come be my wifey and hoping I don't do her wrong. I gave her my word and it's bond. I'm whipping the best like a lamb. I mean no chicken and lamb. Accustomed to call me the man. I never be up on the gram. I'm keeping that way undercover. She want me to tell her I love her. I told her I'm breaking the rules. I told her we making the news. Back in my city, they loving me. Standing alone, I'm 100 deep. Enemy plotting and still in reach. They try to make sure that we underneath. Trying to make sure that we never make it. Coming for power, come get acquainted. Coming for everything that I wanted. Feeling like Drake, but I really wrote it. Feeling like Kendrick, I'm checking names. Gotta roll up while I go insane. Got so much stress, I been gated weight. Stuffing these racks in this Louis case. One thing for certain, I'm about to check. Keep it 100 and nothing less. Stick with the family since day one. Had to stay down till my day come. Had to stay down, but I'm never patient. Hop on the mic and I'm motivated. Hop on the mic and I drop a classic. Haters can't see me, they copping glasses. Back in the studio making magic. Got a new tape and it's in production. Back on my business, I got a budget. Staying low key when I'm out in public. Feel like I'm 75. Know that your team be full of them traders, you know that can never be mine. I'm grabbing a thought when I drive. I'm back in my zone and we on. She said that she ready to come be my wifey and hoping I don't do her wrong. I gave her my word and it's bond. I'm whipping the best like a lamb. I mean no chicken and lamb. Accustomed to call me the man. I never be up on the gram. I'm keeping that way undercover. She want me to tell her I love her. I told her I'm breaking the rules. I told her we making the news. Making it news. Making it news.